I want you to begin by imagining this situation. You are the commanding general of the U.S. Armed Forces, and you are specifically, your goal is to invade and destroy ISIS in the Middle East. Now, you have had so much success, so many victories against ISIS that you have become a household name in the United States. You are entirely, completely famous, and the people love you. And after you are done in the military as the commanding general, you run for president. And it's no surprise that you win by a landslide. Now, however, before you actually get appointed, the current president declares you an enemy of the state and puts you on the run. And you are forced to flee to the one place that you thought you never would. The one place where you are out of the grips, out of the reaches of the United States. And that is an enemy territory, ISIS territory. So you get a friend, you have your connections, and they get you over to ISIS territory, and you hang low for, we'll say, 2 weeks. And you're just in a little shack, nothing fancy, and all of a sudden, boom! 20 men from ISIS rush in, kick down the door, put the bag over your head, and drag you off to ISIS headquarters. Now, you might be a little afraid for a couple reasons. One, you are responsible for the slaughter. You have killed tens of thousands of ISIS warriors. And not only this, so they're certainly angry at you for that, but you are also the potential future president of the United States. They have you in their hands, and not only this, but you are now completely and totally alone in the hands of your enemies. What would you do in this situation? And where would you turn? Now, this is the modern day equivalent of essentially what David was going through back when he was writing Psalm 56. David was the commander of the armies of Israel, and he killed tens of thousands of Philistine warriors. Now, Saul, the current king, he was jealous of David, and he tried to kill him. He put him on the run. And David goes to Ahimelech, the priest at the city of Nob, and he gets the sword of Goliath. Remember, because David slaughtered the Philistine champion with his own sword. So he takes this Philistine sword and he goes to Gath, the Philistine capital, hoping that he can be safe from Israel, from Saul's reach. And he's hoping to lay low, but he is discovered and he is captured. And they see this man who's killed thousands of their men holding the sword of their champion who he had slaughtered. And he's captured. Now, many of us, you might initially think, I can't relate to that. I have not been in the military. I have not been responsible for the killing of thousands of my enemy's troops. So on. You might think you cannot, but every one of us has got some situation where we feel like we are in the hands of something that is totally out of our control. We are in some situation where we feel like things are out of our grip and we feel alone. Now, what do we do? And this is where Psalm 56 is our example. What do we do when we feel alone and when things are out of our control? I want us to notice a few things. Psalm 56 is a prayer of lament. David is lamenting over his situation. He is asking God for help. And this is also, you could maybe call a psalm of anticipated thanksgiving. But there are some things we can notice in David's prayer that are applicable to our own lives. And I've got an acronym that will hopefully help us to remember it. And we're going to follow this outline. It is AT&T, like the cell phone company. But it's not related to cell phones. AT&T. And each one of these are going to be a specific thing that we can glean from David's prayer, his lamentation psalm to God, Psalm 56. The first is this: argue. David argues his case before God. We're going to read this, but I'm going to ask you a couple of questions before we start reading so that you can keep them in mind to be looking for these as we're reading. The first is, what is David arguing for? And second, how is he arguing for it? How is he making his case before God? So let's read. Start in verse 1. And we'll go to verse 8. Be gracious to me, O God, for man tramples on me. All day long an attacker oppresses me. My enemies trample on me all day long, for many attack me proudly. When I am afraid, I will put my trust in you, in God whose word I praise. In God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can flesh do to me? Verse 5, all day long they injure my cause. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They stir up strife, they lurk. They watch my steps as they have waited for my life. For their crime will they escape? In wrath cast down the peoples, O God. You have kept count of my tossings. Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? The first thing, what is David arguing for? You see it right at the beginning. He says, be gracious to me, O God. David is calling for God's grace in his situation. This is what he's arguing for. This whole psalm is him making his case before God. Be gracious to me, God. And secondly, how is he arguing for it? How is he arguing to God? Be gracious to me. He's saying this: look at my situation. Be gracious to me because see the things that are happening to me. My enemies are trampling over me. And he's saying, you know my situation. You know you put my tears in your bottle. They're in your book. You've kept count of my tossings. You know my story. You know my situation. Now, maybe some of you have siblings who get whatever they want. Anyone have that? I know I certainly did growing up. My younger brother was the sibling who I feel like got just everything he wanted. And there are two things why a sibling gets everything they want. Usually one is because they're the youngest sibling. Am I right, huh? And two, it's usually because they're good arguers. Usually they present good cases to their parents. Now, I can think of one specific example, is that there's a family reunion that a lot of years I just didn't really feel like going to that much. It just wasn't that exciting, to be honest. It was probably more fun for my parents than it was for me. And I had to go every year. I just had to suck it up, though. My brother, one year, he says to my parents, though, he says, I don't want to go to this reunion because, one, it's boring. Two, there's no kids my age there. And three, I've got homework to do, so I could really use the time to do that. And my parents, I thought, that's kind of true. Fine, you can get out of it. Well, this is what I think we should be like in our prayers. You see David being a good arguer to his parents. You see David arguing to his father. He's saying, God, be gracious to me, God, so-and-so. He's arguing his case before God, and that is what I think we need to be. We need to be good arguers in our prayer life before God. When we are in our hard situations where we feel like we're out of control, make your argument to God. Make your case. Say, God, you see my struggles. God, you know. Look at what's happening to me. Make an argument before God. That is A. The second point is T, trust. In our hard situations, in our prayers, we trust God. Now, as we look at the text, we see, I'm going to ask you the question, who is in control for David? Verse 2 says, "My enemies trample upon me all day long, for many attack me proudly." Now it appears that man is in control in this situation. Is man in control? No. You see, he says, "Many attack me proudly." And proudly, it comes from the Hebrew word marahun, in a high or lofty state, where you believe that you are in control. So these people, they're attacking him, they're believing they have the upper hand, he's in their hands. But really, David chooses to trust and see that God is in control. We saw, he says, "When I am afraid," verse 3, "I will put my trust in you. In God whose word I praise, in God I trust, I shall not be afraid." I love this right here. What can flesh do to me? David recognizes that he could choose to be fearful, to trust in man, to trust in what his current situation looks like, to trust in who it appears is in control, or he could choose to put his trust in the one who truly is in control. What can flesh do to me? So David is choosing to put his trust in the promises of God. Now, what promises might be going through his mind as he's sitting there totally alone in the hands of his enemies? I can think of this as a big one. "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you," says God. When David could feel like he is totally alone in his difficult situation, he can choose to believe God's promises and trust in them, that God will not leave him. He will not forsake him. In the good times and in the bad times, he will always be there with him. An application of this trust point. Who is in control for you? Think of your situation, whatever situation you are in. Perhaps you have a fear of getting a job. Perhaps maybe you're fearing finances. You're not going to be able to pay the bills. Maybe you've got some debt. Maybe you're fearing health. You're fearing maybe your health of a family member. Grades in school. You might be struggling just to keep your head above water. And you might be fearing your own self-inability, ability to be a good enough father, a good enough mother, a good enough employee, boss, pastor, husband, wife. And with that last one, I think it's okay for us to not trust in our own ability. Because we need to trust in God, in His ability. We need to trust that God is in control. When we have all these situations where it seems like they're out of our hands, where it seems like sickness is in control, where it seems like money or finances, it seems like maybe some other person is in control. It appears that way, but God is truly in control. Think about Philippians 4:6. Come to God in prayer. Make your requests known to Him. And trust in God that He is your provider. Trust in Him that He is greater than your circumstances. And by trusting in Him and offering things up into prayer, we can cast our anxieties on Him, that we don't have anything to fear or worry about, because we know who God is and know that He is someone who's worthy of our trust. So we've got these 2 points so far. We've got A, David argues. T, David trusts. A, T, and T. Anyone have an idea what the third one is? T is thanks. We're going to read verses 10 through 12. And I'm going to ask you, what is the fruit of David's trust in God? What is the fruit of David's trust? He says this: in God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise. In God I shall trust, I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? I must perform my vows to you, O God. I will render thank offerings to you. For you have delivered my soul from death, yes, my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of life. Notice, I will render thank offerings to you. The answer is T, David thanks. And I want to make this case that trust naturally leads to thanks. That you are able to render thanks and praise to God. He says, I will render thank offerings to you. David is already choosing to trust in God's power. You might think that he's sitting there in the jail cells, and maybe he's singing to him. These are modern day hymns, but maybe he's singing, "Great is thy faithfulness." Or perhaps, "Praise God from whom all blessings flow." And why can he do this? Because he trusts in God, and he can thank him already because he knows that God will not leave him. His trust will lead to his thanks. Now you might be thinking, wow, this thanks seems way ahead of itself. Like, David, you're not actually out of the hands of your foes yet. David says, "For you have delivered my soul from death." David, I think you're missing the picture here. Death is still before you. You don't know if you're going to be killed yet. Well, David's trust is allowing this. Is allowing this type of thanks. And another clarification, this thanks is not bargaining. David's not bargaining and saying, hey, if you get me out of this spot, I'll give you a lot of thank offerings. And that's because David gets God. He understands this. Let me offer you a story. So imagine that a 5-year-old comes up to his dad and says, "I want a lightsaber toy, Dad. And Dad, if you give me this lightsaber toy, I'll give you the fridge, I'll give you the TV, and I'll give you the couch." Now, Dad probably just thinks, oh, that's cute. And that's because the son can't give anything to his father. His father already owns all those things. It's not like he can say, I'll give you this stuff if you give me that. That's ridiculous. And that's exactly how it is with God. That's what David understands. There's nothing that David can give to God that isn't already his. God already has everything. There's nothing he can give to him. There's no way he can bargain with him to get him to show up. David's grace is totally unearned. He's arguing to him, be gracious to me. And he's thanking him that he will do that, not because of anything he can give to him, not because his thank offerings are going to earn it to him, but he's choosing to be thankful to God just because of who God is, because he can trust in who God is. And applying this principle of thanks, how do I know that I am trusting in God? Ask yourself that question in your situation. How do I know that I'm trusting in God? And the answer to that is another question. Can I thank God in the midst of my hardship? Am I trusting God enough where I can thank him? Where I can sing, "Great is thy faithfulness." Are you at that point? And I don't want to put pressure on you. I don't think that we all have to just immediately rush to thanks. And that's not what David does either. There's a full 10 verses before David gets to his thanks. He has 10 whole verses of arguing his case. God, look at the terrible things that I'm going through. He's arguing his case and he's choosing to trust. He's saying, God, I will trust in you. But it takes a long time for him to get to his portion where he says, I thank you, God. We don't need to rush to our thanks, but we need to spend plenty of time in prayer, trusting God. So the attitude of gratitude, the thanks, comes as a fruit of the trusting. So maybe you might not be a U.S. commander who's captured by ISIS. Maybe you might not be David, who is captured by the Philistines, but we've all got our trials, our situations where things seem out of our control entirely. Maybe even just a little bit out of our control, enough to cause some anxiety. And when those trials come, we need to go to God in prayer, arguing our case before him. A, trusting in God, in his promises, and who he is. T, and being thankful that you are able to trust and rely on God's provision and care. So in our prayer, we argue before God, we trust God, and we thank God. Now let's go to him in prayer. God, I pray for everyone who is listening right now, who has heard your words, who has observed this psalm, that they would choose to be like David, that they would come to you arguing their case before you, that they would tell you, God, please be gracious to me, God. They would present their case faithfully, and that they would trust in you and know that you're God who will never leave them, that you are always in control. You will never leave them alone. And T, that they can joyfully come to you in thanks, knowing that you are their Abba Father, a God worthy of trust. Let us come to you in our prayers, God. Amen.